Hello, Tom. Thank you for being here today, virtually. Um, you had developed an identity, which was R equals I, several years ago. In fact, I think it was about 10 years ago. Reality equals information. Let's step back for a moment from the crisis at hand and see this situation in a bigger picture, which is what your My Big Toe is all about. A science that'll bring us into a new paradigm. Can you give us the definition of virtual reality, the basis of your MBT concepts, and tell us how we can uh, further understand how we need to have a more global viewpoint on what's going on?
Okay. Well, you know that R equals I came from an interview I had when I was in Austin, Texas. And this was a radio interview, and I was at the radio station, and the interviewer said, well, you have a theory of everything. Einstein was able to write his understanding of the world in just a real simple equation, which is E equals mc squared. Can you reduce yours into something simple like that? And that's when I came up with, as my answer was R equals I. And it's actually simpler than E equals mc squared because it's really an identity. Reality equals information. And that is the fundamental concept underlying My Big Toe. And what that means is that what we call our reality, what we see as our reality, is nothing more than information. We get information, we interpret that information to be our reality. Now you can see that from a perspective of the physical, and then we'll take it, I'll explain that, and then we'll take it one step further into the non-physical. From the physical, you have this body with eyeballs, and we'll just talk about seeing, but hearing and smelling and all of the senses work the same way, but we'll just use the seeing as kind of a stand-in for all the senses. And that is, you receive information when photons bounce off of some object out there in the world and come into your eyes. And those photons get focused by the lens of your eye and onto the retina. And that retina produces electrical signals on your optic nerve. And those signals then cause certain collections of neurons to rearrange themselves, whatever. And that is your digital data, those pulses that you get. And the reason I say it's digital is you don't get a continuous, you don't get a continuous signal. The signal comes in bits and pieces. Neurons are bits and pieces. A neuron is not one big continuous thing. It's a whole bunch of bits, individual neurons. And those pulses you get from that photon is also an individual thing, because those photons are individual things. So the information comes in discrete chunks. We take that discrete information, which then is called digital information. That's what the digital means. It means it comes in discrete chunks. We take that digital information and we interpret it from our experience. So we say, okay, it had this color and it moved like this and smelled like that and sounded like that. And then from our experience, we name it and give it a context, and that's then part of our reality. So we collect digital information with our senses, and that forms our sense of physical reality. It is just our interpretation of that digital data. Now that's the physical way of looking at it. All right, now if you take it a step further, and that is that we're not physical bodies, we're consciousness. And this is a virtual reality. Okay, just like The Sims, it's a virtual reality. And our body is like a Sims character. Okay, and we, consciousness, are like the player of that Sims character. And we receive, just like in The Sims, we receive a data stream from the server that shows us what's going on in The Sims, what our character's doing. And we tell the server what we want our character to do. Okay, I want my character to walk into that house and sit down in a chair. So I pass that intent onto the server. The server has the character go to the door, hand goes to the doorknob, door opens, character goes inside, finds a chair and sits down in it. And the server is sending me the pictures of all of that going on. I get the video, gets sent to me, and it's interpreted by me when I look at it on my video screen. When I look at my monitor, I see a bunch of little pixels that are either lit or not lit. Pixels, just a little piece of your screen that is a color, and it has a brightness, and that's it. It has a location on your screen. So the screen lights up these dots, again, discrete information, lights up these dots of pixels on your monitor, and then you look at it as the player and say, oh, okay, there's my character, just walked in the door, walked across the room and sat down in a chair, just like I told the computer I wanted it to do. So from this viewpoint, you are the player, your consciousness. Your body is the avatar, the Sims character. The computer is also in consciousness. So consciousness is a digital information system. And part of this digital information system is configured as the computer, as the server. Part of it is configured as you. You're the individuated unit of consciousness that is the player in this virtual reality game that's very much like The Sims. So in that case, we still have the same thing. Information creates reality. It's just all about information. But now we're at the level where the information is coming from a digital computer, which is the larger consciousness system, at least a part of the larger conscious system. And that data stream is just like the data stream that's coming from any server to you, to your computer, for a virtual reality game. So it's the same way. So we are individuated units of consciousness. We're going to play this character we call our physical body. We get a data stream that shows us what this physical body is doing. We send data back to the server and say we want the character to walk through the door and sit down in a chair. The computer sends us information, data, showing us the character doing that, and we send back more information. Oh, now that he sat down in the chair, I'd like him to pick up a book and read it. And then the computer shows us a picture of that. So you see, it's just this interaction between us, the individuated unit of consciousness, and the server, which is another part of the larger conscious system. And we're having this exchange of data, and we, as an individuated unit of consciousness, interpret that data to be this reality. Just like you interpret the data, which is all the little pixels that are either lit up or not, you interpret all those little pixels to be, your character, your surroundings in a house, tables, chairs, books, all those things. You interpret them based on your history, on your experience.
That's what I was going to ask you,
that's
Tom.
how you base it.
What are the factors that determine how we interpret data?
Okay, interpreting the data is really what makes our reality our reality. Everyone lives in their own personal reality because everybody interprets this data according to their own constraints, their own background. Okay, what are these constraints? Well, they interpret the data based on their experience, based on their level of fear, based on their level of self-centeredness, based on their level of love and caring, based on their beliefs. See, so whatever it is that makes them up, their beliefs, their fears, whatever that makes them up, their experience, that's what defines them as them, defines their consciousness. That's how they interpret the data. So two people getting the exact same data will interpret it differently. So we all live in our individual reality, and it's a multiplayer game. So we will look at the same table and the same book, and we will see more or less the same thing, but that's only more or less. We actually see a reality. We interpret that into reality that is our own. Even though we both agree that I'm sitting in a brown chair, not a red one, and that the book cover is blue, and that the book has a certain title, we both agree about all that because we both get that data. But what that book means to you and what it means to me or somebody else is maybe totally different. So we have parts of our reality are shared and other parts are personal. That personal part means that our reality is not exactly the same as anyone else's.
Your concepts from your My Big Toe are ones that conclude that we are living in a virtual reality, and also that love is the basis of this reality. How did you reach that conclusion?
Well, that was not a short process. That conclusion was reached over about 30, 35 years worth of study, experience, experimentation, and analysis. I came to that conclusion because I had a lot of experience in exploring this larger consciousness system. I ran into Bob Monroe when I was in my middle to late 20s and learned how to go out of body and explore this consciousness system. We are consciousness, and we can explore all of consciousness. That's our realm. We're not physical bodies. So I learned to do that, and I did it as a scientist, which means I would do things there and then see if I could repeat it, modify inputs, modify variables, and see how that changed it, and so on. So I just did experimentation in this consciousness realm, if you will, in this realm that is non-physical to our so-called physical virtual reality, until I understood facts about consciousness. And I had this whole set of facts about consciousness that was just part of my research in consciousness. I'm also a physicist, so I understand a bunch of facts about the physical world, this virtual reality that we call the physical world. And I started to look for a theory, an understanding that was scientific and logical that would explain all of those facts, the facts from the consciousness research, the facts from the physics. And eventually, I realized that the key connection between both of those worlds was information. Both are based in information. Just like my initial description of reality was one from a physical viewpoint, you come to the conclusion that reality is just information. And from the conscious viewpoint, I came to the same conclusion that reality within that realm was also just information. And then eventually I put the two together into just one bigger picture that had just one scientific, rational, logical theory that explained both consciousness, that's the non-physical, and the virtual reality or the physical world. And it was very, very interesting because once I came up with that overall theory that explained everything, then I wrote these books called, My Big Toe. That's a big picture theory of everything. And it's mine because it's based on my experience, not because I'm so proud of it. It's because it's so, it's based on my own experience. All experience is subjective. And in the consciousness realm, that's easy to understand that everything is subjective. Everything is a product of your own mind. In this, what we call the physical realm, everything is also subjective, except it's the uncertainty in the shared reality is very, very small, which is what makes it appear to be objective. But in any case, once I was able to come up with an overarching theory that explained both sides, I was able to also derive better physics I could understand from that viewpoint of this being an information-based reality, I could understand why quantum mechanics works the way it does, why the double slit works the way it does. And I could explain all of the paradoxes in physics. And physics is just littered with paradoxes, things that we know to be true because of experiments, but we have no idea why they are that way. And double slit was just one of the big ones, but there's a lot of other paradoxes in physics. And this new perspective that I came up with, that this is a virtual reality and based on consciousness, allowed every one of those paradoxes to have a rational, logical solution, a simple solution, a very easy solution. So that gave me a lot of confidence that the overall theory was more likely to be correct, because again, I put everything in probability. I will not say this theory is the answer is, you know, correct and will never be changed. Only foolish people say things like that. You know, we don't have all the information. Years from now, we'll have better understanding. You know, decades from now, centuries, millennia from now, we'll have different understandings, and we'll obviously find different metaphors and express things differently. So I just say that all of the facts that I have run into on both sides, both in the non-physical world of consciousness or in the physical world that's really a virtual world. We just call it the physical world. So I use that term not because it's physical, but because that's what everybody knows what it is. That's our physical universe. I can, as long as I can match or as I can derive all of the facts from this one theory, then that's a good sign that the theory is fundamental and has value. You know,
So
a theory is only valuable as it can produce answers, you know, as it can drive and explain things.
It's solid science, and yet also you have come to the conclusion that caring about others and cooperation is like a fundamental conclusion of yours. Today, putting it in the setting of what's going on these days, people are used to what is best for me and my family. That's most often the way an individual sees the reality. We can see recently how this needs to be expanded to a more global viewpoint, and it is being expanded, really. Why is it important to think outside your subjective reality? And is that subjective reality a reflection of the quality of the individual?
Well, gee, there was a whole bunch of questions there, all run together. Let me kind of go through them. First of all, the reason that this being a virtual reality, a digital reality that's computed in consciousness by the larger consciousness system, and that we're a piece of consciousness that's the player, what that tells us is that the fundamental reality, okay, is really a social system of individuated units of consciousness. So you have the connection between this being a virtual reality, a computed reality, and we being individuated units of consciousness rather than bodies. That idea says that fundamentally, consciousness is composed of many individuated units of consciousness, and that we are all interactive with each other, and that we are cooperative with each other. In other words, the consciousness system puts up this virtual reality, and we log on to make the choices of the avatars that are there. And the avatars, of course, are ruled by a rule set that defines that virtual reality. All virtual realities are defined by their rule sets. And whenever you have a large system of individuals with free will, and all individuals, all individuated units of consciousness have free will. That's a fundamental tenet of the theory. When you have that, you have a social system. When you have a social system, then that system will be able to create more, will be more effective, will have lower entropy, will be a more functional social system if it cooperates, if the individual parts cooperate with each other. And if the individual parts are going to cooperate, if that cooperation is based on caring for each other, it's not cooperation out of fear, but cooperation out of caring, out of love, then that social system will be able to optimize itself, its resources, whatever those resources are. If it's based on fear, then it's very suboptimal. Fear has no trust. Fear, does not cooperate except under duress. Fear is very self-focused and self-centered. So I break that into two groups. I call one the fear side, the other the love side, just two metaphors for those two sides, two opposites. And on the love side, that can be reduced in this scientific logical theory to entropy. Okay, so the high entropy means a lot of disorder is the fear side. Fear creates disorder. Fear creates high entropy. If we talk about long term, now fear can create a little subset of lower entropy. All right, all of you get in the line and stand perfectly still or I'm going to beat you to death. You see, that's fear. And now you get, what's something that was a chaotic bunch of people, and now they all line up and you say, well, that's lower entropy and it's based on fear. Yes, you can lower entropy with fear in a very local, short-term way. But if you want to lower entropy in a system in a long-term way, in other words, change the system, evolve the system, then the only way to do that is to work through the love side, through cooperation and caring. That's the only thing that will work. Fear is not a good long-term strategy for lowering entropy, because in the long term, it always raises entropy, because all those little people that got in a line don't like it that somebody has to tells them to get in the line, and they resent it. And eventually they will overcome the power that's telling them to get in line. They'll get rid of that guy and one of them will become that guy and the whole thing will start over again. So in the long term, fear creates entropy. So the nature of this larger conscious system is to evolve toward states of lower entropy. That is called, in its case, evolution. That's positive evolution. To evolve toward states of higher entropy is de-evolution. That's going the wrong way. And if it de-evolves far enough, it won't be a system anymore. Because if it de-evolves enough, there won't be any cooperation. There won't be any connectedness. Everything that'll be left will just be individual, independent particles. So there will be no information. That's randomness. So a digital information system evolves toward lower entropy states. Lower entropy states means it evolves toward becoming love, evolves toward caring, toward cooperation among its members, among its individuating units of consciousness. So that's what it's all about. So this becoming love, this cooperation thing, is fundamental to us. That's why we're here. That's why we've logged on to this avatar to make these choices, is because this avatar in this particular game that we call our physical universe, this avatar has to make a lot of moral choices, a lot of important choices, whether to be caring on the love side or to be, hostile or self-centered on the fear side. And through those choices, it can then speed its evolution or speed its de-evolution. So it's kind of a way of enabling consciousness to grow more readily, is by putting it in a virtual reality like this, letting it make choices for avatars so that it can evolve or de-evolve accordingly.
Well, we're seeing a lot of evidence of cooperation in this situation, in this current world situation.
And you might say, Donna, this current world situation is like 3 weeks into the COVID-19
Yes,
epidemic.
yes, the
And
pandemic.
that's the situation you're talking about, because this film may come up 10 years later and
That's
people will
right.
wonder,
I'm glad you
yeah,
clarified that. We
yeah,
are in
people
the
will say,
middle.
what is this situation they're talking about? Yeah.
We are in the middle of a
Yeah,
COVID-19
this is
pandemic.
spring 2020 and we're in the middle of COVID-19.
Right. And the success of our world depends on people at this time thinking outside of their subjective reality. And we have seen some wonderful examples of that.
Mhm.
Our world and the success of it and the success of being better in the future, being better able to handle things in the future, all depends on thinking outside and more towards all of the individuals in this reality.
Yes.
And you're my big toe. It's interesting that the hard science, and you have some experiments going on currently that have to do with, and perhaps you can explain better that this conclusion has a scientific basis and is possibly going to rewrite quantum mechanics. So that they're tied together is really fascinating.
Sure. Well, like I say, it's all one theory that explains everything. It
Tell us
explains,
how those experiments are going to provide a basis for your conclusions here.
well, it's, as I said earlier, that this overall theory that started kind of as theory of consciousness and then evolved into a theory of everything with the solving of the paradoxes in physics. I have some quantum mechanics experiments that are being done in a lab in Southern California at a university, and these experiments will basically validate, if they work out the way that I hope they work out. Of course, these are experiments. You don't know how they're going to work out till they're done. But if they work out the way that I think they will, then they will validate the ability of this consciousness theory to derive quantum mechanics. So that is going to be a big deal, because right now, physicists do not understand quantum mechanics. They know how to crank on the math. They can set up a problem and they can do the math, but they have no idea why that particular math should be, should work. Quantum mechanics says that this reality is not made of particles. It's not made of little chunks of mass. It's made of probability. It's a probability based, a statistics based reality. Quantum mechanics is a probability and statistics based science. And it can only describe physical reality in terms of probability. So things happen in quantum mechanics, you've probably heard it referred to as weird science, that just flaunt our present understanding of physics. It just couldn't happen. It's impossible. Our sense of deterministic physics that is matter-based just can't explain how quantum mechanics works. So this theory of mine does explain how quantum mechanics works, and it explains it in a very rational way. So from my viewpoint, quantum mechanics is not weird science. It's a logical science, just like any other science. You just have to have the right perspective to find that logic, which is the perspective of consciousness being fundamental, physical reality being a virtual reality that's information based. So quantum mechanics has taken some assumptions to make it seem more physical. See, mathematics, probability is not a physical thing. It's a math thing. It's not a physical thing. How much space does probability take up? Well, it doesn't. Probabilities is mathematics. It's a logic problem. It's not a problem of physical things. Then you interpret that mathematics to have physical meaning. Okay, so they have created assumptions within quantum mechanics to make it seem more physics and matter based, which it isn't. they know it is statistic and probability based, and these assumptions kind of fly in the face of that. So my experiments will try to point to the fact that there is no physical matter. There's only probability. There's only information. See, mathematics is information, that there is no matter, just information. Now, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of modern physicists would agree with that our reality is information based. That's not just me being way out there and nobody else thinks that. Probably most of the people who do particle physics would agree that reality is information based, because that's the only thing that makes sense as far as looking at the experiments that we do in particle physics and with quantum theory. So anyway, that's kind of the connection between the experiments and the theory. The experiments hopefully will make it, will provide a lot of evidence that the theory is correct. Because when you can create an experiment and predict the answer, and the answer is unexpected, then that makes the theory kind of strong. You see, that's the way science works. If you're able to predict scientific experiments, the results of experiments, then it's a good theory that does that. So that's where we are with that. So let's see, there was another part of this question though that you started with that
yes,
haven't touched yet. What was that?
People, well, how this all connects is very interesting. And
oh yes,
what I think I would like to know, especially in light of this current COVID-19 situation, is how can, in light of our collective goal of cooperation, how can someone who sees themselves as being top of their game, what questions do they have to ask themselves in light of our collective goal of cooperation? What are our best choices?
okay, well let's just look at the word cooperation for a bit. Let me get rid of that. Sorry, my computer's making a lot of noise.
Lots of notifications there.
Just won't quit. Okay, let's talk about the idea of cooperation. Okay, now if you have a social system, if you have, let's even get beneath the social system. If you have a bunch of individuals, and these individuals are going to interact with each other, okay, just a bunch of individuals. We'll take it a very general case. We have individual people with free will, and they are going to interact with each other. Now, if they interact with each other with fear, then that's very suboptimal. If they interact with each other with love, with cooperation, then that is more optimal. Okay, we kind of already talked about that. Well, then how do you do this cooperation? If that's the way that's optimal, what does cooperation mean? Well, if you're going to work together, then you need to have some rules for working together. Okay, so if we're working together and we're going to pick up this long board, then I'm going to get at one end and grab the board, and you're going to get at the other end and grab the board, and then we're going to pick it up and walk. If we both go to the same end and try to grab the same end, it's not going to work. So we have rules. Okay, here's the boards, and the rule is I'll pick up this end and you pick up the opposite end. So that's a rule. That's called cooperation. Cooperations require rules and understanding how we interact. How can we most effectively interact with each other? So it starts with just individuals interacting. For those individuals to interact well, to interact profitably, they need to create some rules for that interaction that defines how that interaction can be worked most cooperatively. Okay, so that is true of all levels. So if we talk about, let's say, just a family, okay, so we have a mother, father, 2 kids, and a dog, and that's a family. And for them to work together, there has to be some rules. They're all interactive, and they need to decide how they're going to live together. Now, if everyone just makes up their own rules, there are no rules, everybody just does whatever they want, then you have chaos. and it's not very functional. Or if everybody just says, well, what about me? It's only about me. It's only that I get what I want. I don't care about anybody else. That's very dysfunctional. But if they work together, then they can produce something that is very functional for everybody. So then we move up from family to like state. Same thing. Everybody lives in the same state. You know, if everybody's just out for themselves, well, that's very dysfunctional. If, you know, if there are no rules at all, very dysfunctional. Okay, so anytime you have groups of people interacting with each other, rules are needed. These rules define how we get along, how we cooperate. It lubricates the interaction of that cooperation. Okay, now we get up to the national level, and it's the same thing. Okay, within a nation, if everybody in that nation cooperates, then they can have, you know, commerce between the states. They can have all sorts of things going on because they can have a monetary system because there's cooperation and there's trust. So now we go up to the global viewpoint. And if we look at the global viewpoint, it's exactly the same thing. So when nations evolve and grow up to the point that they start interacting with each other globally, the nations are interacting with each other globally. Now you need a set of understandings and rules and protocols that define an optimal interaction there. And you see, that's what we lack. So that's why this COVID-19 has been such a problem, and that's why cooperation is really the solution. We don't have that set of rules that define how to be nice to each other, you know, how to look out for each other, how to be cooperative and caring. Well, within a culture, every culture has its own rules. That's what defines the culture. The culture is defined by the rules that are all accepted by people within this culture. That's what we do. Okay, maybe we all walk around, you know, with our shoes on backwards, or maybe we put pots on our heads, but whatever it is in this culture, everybody does that, and that's considered a good thing. It's a helpful thing. So within that culture, these rules help people get along and interact and makes the experience of the whole more profitable. Well, now we get to a world, all the nations in the world. Okay, 500 years ago, the nations were pretty much just independent entities. They interacted. A boat would go from here to there once in a while, but they didn't interact that much. The interaction was just a tiny part compared to their internal interactions. But as time went on, the global interactions are becoming more and more a part of everybody's life. I mean, how many products do you pick up in a day that have made in China written on them? You know, how many products do people around the world pick up that have made in the USA written on them or designed in the US? I mean, we're all interacting now. It's a very interactive global situation, but we haven't yet developed the rules that define how to interact most profitably at a global level. But the interaction's going on. I mean, this will evolve. Eventually, you will evolve a set of rules that will bind everybody, you know, that's in this global interactive theater to, you know, and define what's nice and what's not nice, what's helpful and what's not, just like you have in nations, just like you have in states, just like you have in families. You know, it's just the nature of human beings and consciousness is when they form groups that are interactive, they form rules that help optimize that interaction. You know, all of our rules of politeness, you know, say please when you ask for something, say thank you when somebody gives you something. You know, all these rules of politeness are all part of these rules I'm talking about of how to get along. You know, that's our polite rules are like the lubricant of social interaction. How do you interact with people so that you can get things done and not irritate each other? Well, all these politeness rules help us do that. Makes our interaction more effective. We don't have any politeness rules globally. We don't have any real cooperation goals globally. Globally, everybody sees everybody else as a competitor and kind of an enemy. You know, you'll have little groups will get together, and you know, so then you have the West Western countries versus the Eastern countries, in the North Hemisphere versus the Southern Hemisphere. Groups may make little pacts within each other, but we haven't yet evolved to a global set of rules and understandings so we can all work together to optimize that interaction. Anything that we do that is not helpful to other countries, we need to be aware of it and not do it. We need to have a responsibility. So my point is that now we've gotten to this era of I don't know what can I say, endemic global interaction. We need to follow that with some global responsibility and global understanding and global caring and global love, connectedness. See that we're all in this boat together. So that's what we have to change. And I think this COVID-19 that we're facing now is helping us wake up to this idea of being responsible in a global setting, because this COVID-19 is a global, epidemic. It's everywhere. And if anybody doesn't help contain it, then it's going to spread to everybody, to more. So we all have to cooperate. So we're suddenly had this kind of pushed in our face that, if you want to save a couple of 100,000 people from dying of this thing, then we need to actually care about each other. We have to take the moral decision that other people's lives are important, not just our family and our loved ones, but people all over this planet are important, and we need to care about them. We need to not do things that hurt other people, and we need to do things that help other people on a global sense. So that's the big step up. That's the big challenge here, is can we humanity, step up to this awareness that we're interacting globally? And that means we're going to have to start cooperating globally so that we can make this interaction that we have beneficial to everybody and not toxic to the few.
A lot of evidence nowadays, because so many people have been so affected. There's a lot of evidence of a lot of cooperation and caring. But basically, what you have presented today is we need to step outside of our subjective reality because the success of our world depends on it.
The success of us individually and of us collectively and of the whole world also depends on it, because that is the only thing that evolves in the long term in a positive direction. Everything else de-evolves and takes us in a negative direction.
Yes.
It's not that we should do this just because it's a good thing to do, and it's just one of many paths. It isn't. It is the whole point and purpose of us existing at all, is that we interact in this virtual reality, and we interact with choices that favor love rather than fear, that favor cooperation rather than self-centeredness. And that's what it's all about for us individually, for us as families, states, nations, and globally. That's what it is from top to bottom. There isn't any other way to get there other than through caring, through responsibility, through love. That's the only path that will bring us to a more functional, more profitable, long-term evolution.
Thank you, Tom.
So there it is. And now we're ready to step up to the next level. All right. We did it at the individual level and we did it at the state level. And now we got to do it at the global level. But it will be done, because wherever you have that interaction, eventually the rules will evolve. I mean, so it's coming. It's not like, oh, this is globalism. Oh, globalism is an evil thing, or globalism is the answer. Globalism isn't a thing that you do. It's a thing that happens. It just happens when you have a lot of interaction globally. If there's very little interaction globally, then you never get to globalism. But once you have a lot of global interaction, like passing viruses around or products around, whenever you have a lot of interaction globally, then you're going to have rules globally that help define responsibility in the global setting. So it's not a matter of globalism as a thing that we can choose or not choose. Globalism is going to happen. We have an internet. We all can stare into each other's eyes now from any distance, around the world. It's a global neighborhood that we live in. But eventually, if we're going to continue and we're going to last here on the long term, we'll have to cooperate. We'll have to interact with moral correctness, not with self-centeredness. So it's destiny. It's not necessarily that you choose globalism over nationalism. It's that globalism will happen because interaction happens globally. Now it's a matter of let's get the rule set to help us make this a nicer, better, kinder, gentler place to live in.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for presenting your theory of everything within this larger, bigger picture. I know you have said too, it's one of my favorite quotes, love is not just a nice idea, it is the fabric of our reality. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Donna.